Hello, and welcome back to the Battle Frontier podcast, where we aim to help you level up in your journey as a competitive Pokemon TCG player. I'm Aaron Curry. Here with me, as always, is my co-host John Orgel. And this week, we are pretty light on segments. We're going to jump into a time capsule that John has prepared before I hit him with a Blaine's quiz show. And the meat of this episode is going to be doing a tier list ahead of the upcoming Atlanta Regional this week, where John and I will both be in attendance as a player and as a judge. First, I want to know, actually, before we jump into everything, wow, how'd your week go this week, John? What were you up to?
It's good. So over the weekend, I went and visited my friend in Indianapolis. I did install Velatro, and so I did play that like way too much on the plane. Like I had a 2-hour flight from Baltimore to Indianapolis, and I played Velatro the whole time. And like
How many decks have you already won with?
I think 2 or 3. I can't remember. So I've played probably like 4 or 5 hours of it at this point. It's hard, dude. It's so hard to win. But it's like once you get like, I don't know, like big number make me happy, kind of vibe, like straight up. Like once you get those combos flowing, it's like a dopamine rush. So I had to be careful to be like, all right, John, like you're here with your friends. You can't really pull out Velatro and play it right now. So like that. And I'm like, I definitely have to like not play this at work. Otherwise I will get nothing done.
Right.
But other than that, the Indy was cool. It rained it's been really, really bad weather in the Midwest over the weekend, and like late last week and into the weekend, it was like raining really bad. So my heart goes out to anybody in Kentucky that's affected by floods. We had some really terrible things happen. But Indy was pretty wet, but still had a lot of fun. It was cool. Like my best friend Thomas from high school, he's like a new father. His kid's 2 now, but I hadn't met his kid, and so that was fun to like meet her and see him as a father. It's cool to see like your friends that you've had for a really long time become fathers and take on that role, and he does a really good job. So that was really cool to see. But we got to play some Pokemon. He doesn't play too much. He plays like he got back into it, I think, the beginning of this year, like end of last year.
Okay.
So he had like a deck built, but it wasn't anything good. So I brought like 5 decks and showed him how to play like Mammoth Swine, and he's like, "This is too easy." And I'm like, "Oh, all right, let's go." So then I gave him Raging Bolt to work with, and he had a little more fun with that. But yeah, it was a good set. And then we went to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, which is really cool. Yeah, it was a really cool time. It's like you have to go underneath the racetrack, and so it's like in the middle of the speedway. And the speedways, I mean, I don't think like photos do it justice. Like when you drive up to it, like it's 2.5 miles around, but it's like 2 miles wide. Like it's so big. It's a city. It's basically a city. It just kind of pops up out of nowhere. So that was really fun. And then it was just kind of bopped around. Like went to a farmer's market. Went to like a cool vintage store that was in a converted factory, and just went back home. And then yesterday we had our regionals prep tournament at League, so that was fun. We had just a small turnout, like 8 players playing, but we had some people that were getting ready for Atlanta.
Sure.
And so that was good. I think Terrapagos, the tanky one with Buffalon build. Yeah. So so nothing too surprising there, but it was good. Ran smoothly and everybody had a fun time. I had like some extra things from like pre-release stuff that I gave away, so that was kind of cool. It's a good time. How about you, man? How was your weekend?
Pretty busy. Like a lot of Pokemon on Sunday, but I guess I can start. Didn't really do much on Friday in particular. Unfortunately, my son's been sick for like the past week, so he's been on steroids and not really able to do a ton because you don't want him like wearing himself out. So instead, he was just kind of a hooligan inside the house. But that is what it is. On Saturday, unfortunately, I had to go into work for a little bit, so my wife and son went out and were doing something. So I got some stuff done around the house, like painted a wall and whatnot, and then they came home and Saturday evening, we went and saw the Minecraft movie, which I would not really recommend to anybody.
Yeah.
But
okay,
it was there. And the kids that were in the theater seemed to have a really good time.
Yeah.
Like, it was definitely a
Did Brody
children's
like it?
movie. Yes, yes, he did. He
That's good.
absolutely did. Um, but honestly, I had read ahead of the movie coming out that it was horrible, and
Mm.
had that expectation kind of going in, and then was very, very surprised when basically every showing at the theater was sold out.
Wow. I mean,
And
I guess it's just you're capitalizing on a media franchise.
yeah, yeah, and I guess
So,
supposedly it's the highest grossing video game movie ever, so, or highest grossing opening weekend for a video game movie ever, which is kind of
wow.
crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was my Saturday, and then Sunday, um, my friend Santiago came over, and we literally played Pokemon for like 9 hours,
Dang.
and had a bunch of decks that are good decks, didn't feel super great, and had a couple that I thought were, I had a preconceived notion that they were mid or bad that actually felt pretty dang good.
Oh, okay.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into our tier list. So that pretty much sums up what I've been up to. So we can go ahead and jump into our first segment here and hit me with the time capsule you had prepared for this week,
Yeah,
Joe.
sure. So for this week's time capsule, I figured I'd throw it back to the last time that Dragapult was really dominant in the metagame. And this was a different version of Dragapult. It was a Dragapult VMAX. And this is a list piloted by Tord Reklev at the Players Invitational. I think the first one that happened. This was a tournament that happened during COVID. So it was like a format lost to time essentially.
Sure.
Um, and this was played by him and Henry Brand in the tournament, and I think he beat Mahone in the Players Cup tournament. This was just like a 8-player invitational tournament that they had. I think maybe round robin or something like that, or double elimination, something like that. But this is a really cool list, and it has some similarities to Dragapult EX. So I figured it'd be kind of cool to go over it real quick. So the main attacker you have is Dragapult VMAX. It has very similar attacks in a lot of ways, with Shred being a little bit more powerful than Headbutt. Um, it's 60 for one psychic, and then you can basically, it's classic Shred. You can go through anything, all effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So it goes through anything that prevents, like a Mimikyu essentially. And then its second attack is probably the most powerful attack in this metagame. Max Phantom, it for 2 psychic, it's 130 damage, and then you put 5 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way you like. So very similar to what we were seeing from Dragapult EX. It's a psychic Pokemon instead of a dragon Pokemon. I think there was dragon Pokemon in this format, but this just wasn't a dragon Pokemon.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, we've had other
and
psychic type Dragabolts. Like, it's a
yeah.
ghost.
Yeah, we had one from Fusion
Yeah.
Strike and another one Infiltrator. But anyways, this is Dark Week and then Fighting Resistant, which Fighting Resistant was pretty good. It just had the one retreat cost. So that's the main kind of engine of the deck. You have 4 Dragapult V. Doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, Assault's okay of an attack, but you'd much rather be using. You really just want to get Dragapult VMAX in play as fast as possible.
Sure.
And then the rest of it's just kind of a support engine. It's a very simple deck. So like I feel like with Tord, there's usually like 2 styles of Tord decks. It's like 4 of 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 4, like all 4 ofs,
Yeah.
or like 15 to 31 ofs in a deck. And this is definitely the former of the 2 options. You have Jirachi with Stellar Wish. It's an ability that says once during your turn before you attack if this Pokemon is in your active, you may look at the top 5 of cards of your deck, reveal a trainer card you find there, put it to your hand, and then shuffle the other cards back into your deck. And then it does put this Pokemon to sleep, which would normally be pretty detrimental, but we do run Escape Board as a 3 of, which is a tool card where if it's attached to a Pokemon, the retreat cost of this Pokemon is 1 less, and it can retreat even if it's asleep or paralyzed. So a really, really nice tool to pair with this Pokemon, and you would get this into the active turn after turn, and just kind of spam it and try to find a couple different things. You have Mysterious Treasure in this format, which was a nice item card. It's if you discard a card from hand, you can search your deck for any Psychic or Dragon Pokemon, and then put it back and reveal it and put it into your hand. So you can get all of the main attackers of the deck. You have Quick Ball, and those are like the main two ball search, if you will. Quick Ball and Mysterious Treasure. So you're using those to set up. You have a Scoop Up Net, so you could put a Jirachi in the active, and if you didn't get what you needed, scoop it up and put another Jirachi in the active and try it again. Basically, this is a really really broken card that I would say is probably uh, it's banned and expanded, so that tells you how powerful it is. There's not a lot of cards that are banned. This is one of them. It says put one of your Pokemon that isn't a Pokemon V or Pokemon GX in your hand, and then you discard all the cards. So the reason it's banned and expanded is because they didn't add EX
Right.
or
Yeah.
rule box Pokemon.
Yeah.
But even in this era, like if you play this era, you recognize like this is it's pretty broken. I mean, I think the most popular combo was with the Sword and Shield Inteleon line, where you had shady dealings, and so you would search for all those, and so that would let you search for item cards. This is more of a turbo build, so it didn't really run that. You have some Galarian Zigzagoon, which has, why are you running a basic that has a bad attack? Well, it's because it has a really good ability, which says it's Headbutt Tantrum. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may put one damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So, similar to Halucha, you have this guy. So you can kind of ping bench sitters and just basically run through any setup deck with the combination of Dragapult's Max Phantom and Headbutt Tantrum to kind of clean up bench sitters and stuff like that. This guy is a little bit different. I haven't seen it too many lists. This is a Giratina from um, Unified Minds. It just has an ability that's similar to, I think there's a couple
Enhanced
Pokemon.
hammer.
Yeah, Enhanced Hammer. There's some other guys I think that have this effect,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Zerkatree
There's a Mawile.
GX, Mawile, yeah.
Yeah.
But its ability is Dimension Breach. It says when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. So you can't do wherever, but it's still pretty strong. It gets rid of, I think we had some really strong like Beast energies and like I think some water decks had like Splash Energy where it returned it back to your hand if it got knocked out or something. I'm trying to remember why exactly you ran this, but I am at a loss. But it's always good. Part of it might be the horror energy. So this is a special energy that you ran, and it says as long as this is attached to a a Pokemon, it provides psychic energy. But if it's a psychic Pokemon, if it's damaged by an attack, you put two damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. So just kind of softens stuff up and fixes a lot of the math for Max Phantom.
Sure.
Yeah. The rest is mostly just consistency, like I said. We are running a Dedenne GX, which is a really broken support Pokemon. With Dede Change, it's just during when you play this from your hand onto your bench, you can discard your hand and draw 6, and you can't use more than one Dede Change per turn. So I think probably one of the most broken, like more broken than Squawk. Squawk you can only use turn 1. Dede Change you could use whenever. We run 4 research, 4 Marnie, which is shuffle, and both players shuffle, put their hands at the bottom of their deck. You draw 5, your opponent draws 4, which was overpowered in a lot of ways in my mind. Not my favorite. I like Iono a lot better. You run 3 boss to kind of manipulate where you're placing damage counters and what you're knocking out and all that. You run, like we said, the ball search. You run Acrobike to just dig through your deck. You run Energy Spinner, which is kind of like a precursor to Earthen Vessel. It just says search your deck for a basic energy card, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you go second and it's your first turn, you can search for 3 basic energy instead of 1. So it's like we had energy search at the same time, but this was just a better version of that, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
with a little bit more of an upside. Um, Reset Stamp is in this deck, which it's not my favorite card, man. I'll be honest with you. It's an item card, and then it just has the text: your opponent shuffles their hand into their deck and draws a card for each of the remaining prize cards. So for an item card, you're able to, if your opponent's at 2 prizes, just say, okay, you're now at two cards in your hand, and good luck trying to figure out what to do from here.
That seems pretty
Um,
unfair.
yeah. I mean, it's pretty rough. Like you could set up your board to where it wasn't as impactful necessarily, but realistically, like yeah, it feels pretty bad. Um, and then the last thing that I want to talk about is your stadium you're running is called Shrine of Punishment. It just says between turns you put 1 damage counter on each of your Pokemon GX and EX, both yours and your opponent's. So just straight up, it just softens a lot of the guys. So like if your opponent benches to Dene, you can boss it up, hit it, and then over 3 turns or over between turns 3 times essentially, the Dene GX will just get knocked out. And you can save some of your other damage counters for placement to just clean up other prize cards on board. Um, but yeah, this deck was really, really strong. Like I said, Tord won this event with it. If we go back and look at the meta a little bit from this era, uh, this is not what I'm talking about. Yeah, here we go. This was the Players Cup kickoff invitational. So I guess before they had the Players Cup, they did an invitational event where they had 8 players, including mostly from the U.S. Oh, 4 from the U.S. and 4 internationally. So you had Tord from Netherlands, Mahone, Pablo Mesa, Michael Premwat, Natalia Fernandez, Henry Brand, Raul, and Ross. So like a stacked lineup. And we had some really cool decks. But this was definitely the most powerful in this format. So this deck was really, really good. And then right after this format, I guess, like maybe a couple months later, after um, in late 2020, we had the release of a card called Eternatus, which is this guy, and this kind of dominated the meta game for a really long time. And since Dragapult's Dark Week, it can't really survive against this deck.
Sure.
So, but I would say that in Spirit, Dragapult plays very similar to the Dragapult we have currently. It's less consistent. That was a factor. Um, but I think like your strategy or your ability to set up KOs, with Zigzagoon, not quite Dusknoir levels of degeneracy, but still pretty good with the scoop up nets. And then just kind of pick apart your opponent's board and destroy a lot of setup decks. Made this deck really, really good. So just felt like this was a good one to look at back in the time capsule. And as before we get into the new metagame, I wanted to focus on something from the past. So
Sure.
that's this week's time capsule.
Yeah, I mean this highlights to me why evolving EXs are just a much better design choice than Vs and VMAXs.
Yeah,
Like having something, it's got the same HP as Dragapult, but it's effectively a stage 1, and its attack is just a slightly downscaled version of the same attack. And I don't know if giving up an extra prize is enough of a trade off for that added ease of access to the card. Just, I don't know.
but yeah, I think I agree. I think having 2 prizers that evolve up from squishier 70 HP Pokemon feels a lot more fair than just being able to evolve into this 320 hit point behemoth that's really hard to take down.
Right.
That can just take over the game. Like, even tag teams I felt like were more fair in some ways because the HP was a lot lower and more manageable. Yeah, early VMAXs like or especially Eternatus felt really bad when it came out. I don't know. I know
Well,
you didn't really play
it
much.
had access to too many tools from what I can see. Like you've got the Zigzagoon, just to help hit damage numbers that you're looking for. I mean, it's essentially Terrapagos, right? Or Mega
Yeah,
Rayquaza, or insert Skyfield deck
right.
SO.
The same premise.
And
Um,
that in and of itself doesn't bode well because generally that type of deck is powerful.
yeah,
And then
Eternatus wasn't. Sorry, keep
I was
cutting
just
you.
saying, when you couple that with a massive HP pool, it has the potential to be abusive.
Yeah, Eternatus when it was played never struck me as like the deck that was a thinking man's deck. It was kind of just like me hit big numbers and knock things out in one hit,
Sure.
and that's a viable strategy. I mean, we've seen that basically since the beginning of Pokemon with
Hmm.
Haymaker, if you want to go that far back. But I think I like the interplay of like evolution, evolving your stuff up, getting your setup. Like Eternatus, like turn 2, you're swinging for gobs of damage. There's 30 for each, I think, bench Pokemon on your side. So, eight times 30 is, what is that?
240.
240.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
which
still
knocks out.
Terrapagos numbers. Like,
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, but it just felt in that format where stuff had a lot lower HP, or gave up more prizes, essentially, it felt, just unfair in a lot of
yeah.
ways. But,
Yeah, some of them wouldn't be quite as bad. Like, I know, obviously, Eternatus and Mew stand out as coming to the super busted ones when they were powerful. The Dragapult seems a bit more manageable just because it's not hitting for big one hit KO numbers in and of itself. But at the same
yeah.
time, I could totally see how an attack like that or a deck like that would keep something, Inteleon based on the back foot or kind of out of the format as long as it is a big player.
Yeah, for sure.
But cool. Thank you for that. I think that is all we have here talking about the past. But before we jump into the present, we're going to hit you with a little bit of trivia this week with this week's episode of Blaine's Quiz Show. And so, here for John, I've got our usual Blaine's Quiz Show questions, or usual concept for Blaine's Quiz Show. So, John will have 3 multiple choice questions. For each correct answer, he will be awarded with 1 point, and he has access to 1 hint during any of these questions that will hopefully allow him to answer it correctly. So, that being said, John, before we jump into things, I'm going to tell you that the topic for this week is not abilities. That is not what I meant to include here.
Oh, bummer.
So, we're going to cut that out. So, on to our first question then. Which of the following does not place damage counters on Pokemon? And your options are Frostlass from Twilight Masquerade, Ancient Tomb from Hidden Legends, Curse Stone from Legend Maker, or Shrine of Punishment from is that Celestial Storm, I believe.
Yeah. Well, we just looked at Shrine of Punishment in the deck list.
Well, I didn't know
Funnily
you were
enough.
going to do that, man.
No, I know.
Maybe you get 2 hints this week.
Yeah, I think this is tough though. I don't know much about Curse Stone and Ancient Tomb. But I'm gonna be able to, I think, rule out Frostlass and Shrine of Punishment, unless like the wording's funny, where it's like, no, but I think it says place damage counter. It's like Frostlass is built place damage for each Pokemon that has an ability. Shrines place for each EX or GX and V. I think I don't no maybe not V, but EX and GX, something like
Sure.
that. Yeah, I think. Just trying to remember what Ancient Tomb does. All on Legends. I think that Ancient Tomb did do like because I've played Holon format, and there's a card that might be Ancient Tomb that places for each like EX in that era, and I think it is Ancient Tomb. So I'm gonna go with Cursed Stone here. It's my final answer.
Okay. So I'll let you know before I reveal the answer that the card you were just describing is actually Desert Ruins.
Uh,
And the answer is, in fact, Ancient Tomb. Cursed Stone has effectively the same text as Frostlass, where it places 1 damage counter on each Pokemon with an ability. Or at the time it said Poke Power, it actually didn't hit Poke Bodies, interestingly enough. And Ancient
Hmm.
Tomb was a stadium that was very, very rarely played. I don't know if it ever actually was competitively successful, but it simply removed weakness from Pokemon that were not EXs or owners' Pokemon.
Huh. Okay.
So just
Well,
trying to flip a tight
bummer.
matchup on its head.
Yeah,
That's okay, though.
I
We got
misremembered. I don't think I remember the name of it, but yeah, Desert Rune definitely. Now that you've said it, like I can picture the card a lot more
yeah.
effectively.
If you had
All right.
not played back then, I don't know why you would have ever seen this card. Although I guess interestingly, I could see this being a good cube card
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, maybe it helps for some. Yeah, because like most cube decks are like monotype, so if you get a bad type matchup, I could see it helping. Anyway.
Sure. Okay, let's move on to question number 2.
Ooh.
Like Lily's Rabombi, this Pokemon from the Stormfront expansion was able to pull Pokemon from your opponent's hand onto their bench with its ability. And your choices are Magnezone, Lumineon, Tangrowth, and Mismagius.
Oh no. All right, I'm gonna use a hint here. This is like I don't have a clue. I think like the
Okay.
last one I had some idea, but this one I'm gonna have to have some help.
Yeah, I may have made this one a little bit difficult. So obviously, some of the options are things that either have vines or magnets attached to them.
Hmm.
But I will tell you that neither Tangrowth nor Magnezone are the correct answer.
Oh, all right. Okay. So Stormfront. If I'm trying to remember what
All of these
era.
Pokemon are in Stormfront.
Yeah. Okay. Because like Luminion, I'm like, is that newer? I can't remember if that got when that. But yeah, I'm thinking of something else. Um, what era was this? If you
Diamond
don't
Pearl.
mind giving me Diamond and Pearl. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So SPs and might have been a little bit before SPs, but I think
Yeah, Stormfront is actually the expansion before Platinum.
okay. Okay, so we have Luminion or Mismagius. Hmm. I will go with Luminion here. I think Mismagius had a different ability. Just kind of spitballing.
Okay. And you are correct.
All
Now, at the
right.
time, this was a Pokepower, but I just wanted to go with ability for the sake of keeping up
Right.
with modern trends. Luminion had the Finluster Pokepower that said once during your turn. If Luminion is your active Pokemon, you may look at your opponent's hand, and if your opponent's bench is not full, choose one basic Pokemon from their hand and put it onto their bench. Then, additionally, you would also switch that Pokemon from the bench into the active.
Oh wow.
So, pretty interesting. If this had been a basic, it actually might have seen some play,
Mm-hmm.
but being a stage 1 makes it a little bit prohibitive to get set up.
Yeah,
But cool.
yeah, I could see that. You picked something I have no clue. I've never seen that card before, so it's a good guess. I'm
I'm
happy
not
with that.
surprised. So we're 1-1 so far, heading into our last question here. And I want to know, what is the name of the special marker placed by the ability of Gardevoir EX from Dragon Frontiers? And your choices are block, captive, locked, or imprison.
So I know this because my friend has a cube with the Gardevoir EX in it.
Okay.
It is in prison. So I got one for free, I guess. So that's nice.
Hey, having the knowledge means you're equipped to answer the question. You
True,
are
true.
totally correct. It is the Imprison marker, being the name of Gardevoir EX's Pokepower. And what the Imprison marker does is prevent the Pokemon that has that marker from using its ability. And so this card, again, didn't see a ton of super competitive success. I know at one point Kevin Nance actually played a deck that utilized this card
Oh, that's cool.
to some pretty interesting success, shutting down things like Pidgeot and I believe Blastoise, just trying to things that would want to sit on the board and continuously use their abilities. And he went for this thing where I'm going to lock that down and then knock everything else out while this useless thing is on your board.
Sure.
It was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Pretty cool card.
One of the guys in my league, Tegan Hall, shout him out. He played this deck. I think we played like RSPK,
Sure.
and he played that. He played this in his deck for that. So
Yeah, I know this card sees a lot of play in that format for
mm-hmm.
sure, for sure. Much better there than it was during standard. But yeah, there you go, John. 2-1 this week.
Respectable,
Yeah, very
respectable.
nice.
I feel like I got tripped up. Like I could have got 3 for 3, but I'll take 2 for 3. That's still pretty good.
Yeah, there we go. So, once again, unfortunately, John and I have not done our homework, so we do not know the exact point totals. But I believe I am currently ahead by 4 right now.
Yeah, 4 or 5, one of that.
Yeah, we will at some point be wise enough to put the point totals somewhere here in the show. But that
Until
being said,
then,
that'll do it for Blaine's quiz show this week, and
great.
we will now swap over and look at the main topic for this week's episode, and that's which is going to be a tier list of decks in the Journey Together format heading into Atlanta Regionals this weekend. And we're going to open things up by kind of defining our tiers, as it were, here. So, our D tier is going to be decks that you absolutely do not want to bring to this event unless you just have fun losing. And the example we have for that is, unfortunately, United Wings. This deck, obviously, this archetype, I should say, exists. These cards are legal. You can play them. You're probably not going to make it very far if you do. That's
Yeah,
just
you'd
the
you'd have a
unfortunate
lot of
reality.
fun, but yeah, realistically, does this deck give you a chance to win more games than lose? Probably not.
Sure. And then our C tier are probably going to be decks that are potentially viable archetypes, but they just don't really feel like they're positioned super well into the format. And the defining deck that we have for this tier is actually going to be Feraligatr. Despite winning Champions League, Feraligatr is kind of a known quantity now, and I think that really takes away from what made it successful in that tournament, where the melodic played a pretty big factor in some of the wins that the deck was able to put together. And now that people are kind of wizened up to that, know how to play around the retreat lock better, are including more copies of Turo and or Switch in their deck, the deck just kind of falls short in a lot of ways, as it has to set up this big multi-card combo to really get into games.
Yeah, I think it also gets collateraled by like people teching for Teal Mask Ogrepawn's Sob. A lot of the strength of Feraligatr is based on its ability to like trap something in the active,
Sure.
and then use Monkey Dory a bunch of times. So once your opponent like figures out, oh yeah, I mean it just gets collateral. Like it's not well positioned right now.
Yeah. Next for our B tier, these are decks that are not odds-on favorites to win the tournament, but wouldn't be all that surprising if they do, and are probably pretty decent options if you're looking to make day two. And one of the decks that we think calls that out pretty well is Eevee Box. And something that we saw, Drew Kennett actually brought this to Vancouver, closing out last rotation. And it's something that looks even better, I feel, in the post rotation format, where you do have a lot more Noctowl focused decks. And the ability to put on some early pressure by either, explosively evolving an Eevee on turn one and getting a Flareon attack to power something up on the bench, or like all Noctowl decks, if you're playing Crispin and Noctowl, you have the ability to play that Water Ogrepawn. And if you're playing the Terra Crystal along with that, you can go ahead and do that Torrential Pump play that Terra Box is so well known for. And just being able to hit multiple weaknesses through the fire on Flareon. You could potentially play Leafeon if you were worried about Charizard or wanted to hit Cornerstone Ogrepawn for weakness. You can play Sylveon in combination with Lily's Clefairy if you want to one hit KO Dragapult and other Psychic Weak Pokemon, Raging Bolt as another example, or even that Angelite attack really being able to set your opponent back. So the deck has options, and the big thing that I think stops this deck from being A tier is that it does better in a more defined metagame. And when everything is still so raw right now, I think it's going to have a little bit of difficulty finding true footing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is just like different version of Terra Box. It has different options. It has, some might say, more options essentially, more type coverage for sure. But I think there's um, definitely like it feels like a step below something like what we're about to talk about.
Sure. And then, A tier, these are decks, they're going to be popular. They're going to make day two. They're very likely to make top cut, and would not at all be surprised to see them being, top four and or winners of the event. And kind of the poster child for that right now is Dragapult Dusknoir. And surprised this deck sticks around post rotation. You lose the same things that most of the other decks do, except you still have a stage one draw engine to kind of supplement what your deck is trying to do. And we've seen some stuff where people have transitioned away from using Sparkling Crystal as their ace spec, and I've seen a lot more inclusion of Unfair Stamp. And I've actually seen a couple of lists that I've run into recently with Hero's Cape
Hmm.
to try to push things through. I don't know about that per se, but the Unfair Stamp Badoo and keep setting up while your opponent is trying to do something is oppressive to say the least. And then Dragapult is as good as ever at coming back from 5 or 6 price deficits.
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, this is the mainstay of this format in a lot of ways. The main thing that I might put it like below some other decks we'll look at in a minute would just be it's such a known quantity that every player playing against you is going to have an idea of how to play against this.
Sure.
Is going to have a strategy for this. Whether they can implement it successfully and beat you is another thing. If you're a really, really good player, I mean, we saw Andrew Hedrick play it essentially to like perfection last format, and I think a lot of the text, a lot of the strength of that Dragapult deck carry over to this format as well.
Sure. So next deck we're going to talk about here is straight Dragapult. And John, where do you think this fits here on our tier list as we've defined it?
Um, that's a good question. It's interesting because you would think it'd be worse than Dragapult Dusknoir. You have less options, but I almost want to put it above Dragapult Dusknoir in
Okay.
this case. At least going into Atlanta. It's a much more straightforward variant. And I think you have more answers for more of the meta game right now. Like the Tanky Terapagos deck I was looking at. I mean, and granted, you always have to take limitless meta percentages and matchups and all that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. But I was surprised to see it had a more favorable Terapagos Noctowl matchup than the Dragapult Dusknoir. And I think a lot of that has to do with you're not giving up, the Dragapult or the Dusknoir prizes as much.
Sure.
And so you're able to just kind of, if you can give up the Badoo prize early, but then you can come from behind a lot more effectively. You run the Blood Moon Ursaluna on a lot of these lists, if not
Mm-hmm.
all of them. And you have a little bit more power to hit harder late game. So that's always helpful. But I think the strength of Dragapult, as opposed to Dragapult Dusknoir, um, you're able to run kind of some weird stuff that can help you out in a lot of your bad matchups. And I think right now I'd put it up above Dragapult Dusknoir. I don't think the deck's particularly stronger than Dragapult Dusknoir, but I think it's more well positioned, is what I'm getting at.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, kind of like a 1A, 1B sort of scenario.
Definitely.
Just kind of a spoiler alert. We're not going to put anything in S tier. Um, John and I talked about this a little bit before the cast, and we decided that literally every deck that we're going to talk about here has at least one matchup that it just does not want to see. And, by that metric, that means there's nothing that is absolutely kind of holding the format in the chokehold. And, even when Regidrago was kind of the S tier deck and Raging Bolt was considered a quote unquote bad matchup, it still was beating it more than 50% of the time from what I've seen. So nothing here fits that criteria. So there isn't going to be no S tier here. Next
Yeah.
thing on the docket would be Enzorark, though. And for me, this is a deck I want it to be good so bad. I really, really wanted this to be good. And I will say it does have a good Terra Box matchup. I really think that matchup is largely favorable, but it just struggles into Dragapult really, really hard. And for that reason, unfortunately, I think that this deck kind of has to go down into our C tier because I do expect Dragapult to overall be more popular than Terra Box at the end of the day.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. We didn't really talk about meta percentages, but I do think that Dragapult will be the most played deck in Atlanta.
Sure.
Between the two different variants of it, I definitely think Dragapult Dusknoir will be the most popular. But I imagine those two decks will make up 15 to 20%, like that range is what we'll be looking at. I think that's a fair way to say that.
Yeah. And I also think for the ends deck, you actually struggle a lot into the Terapagos deck as well. Just not being
Mm-hmm.
able to
Yeah.
utilize your Darmanitan very well. It's definitely possible for the Terapagos deck to make plays where they take one hit KOs on your Zoroarks, or set it up to where they hit you for a small amount of damage and you can't KO them back, and it just becomes extremely difficult for you to really do anything.
Yeah, agreed.
Next up would be one of the other most popular decks in the room. That's going to be the Terra Box.
Yeah, this one's interesting to me. Coming into this format, I think it was presumed to be like best deck in format. Like we saw players play this as like the hot rogue in the Champions League
Mm-hmm.
for this format. Tord played it and did really well with it. And some other players, I think, but that's the first one that comes to mind. So this was like the deck coming into Journey Together.
Yep.
But I think it's fallen off a little bit. I think that's fair to say. It's not quite high A tier, but I still think it's like on the border of A and B at this point. I want to put it. I'll keep it an A. I think it still has legs for the most part,
Sure.
but I don't know. Like another one of the, it's like one of those decks that just has a target on its back. Everybody's gonna have an answer for it. Sob's not gonna work like you would hope it would. People are gonna have answers for that. But it's still powerful. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we've Wellspring Ogre Pond feels oppressive at times without
Sure.
having a bench barrier Pokemon to prevent stuff from just getting picked apart. And then, yeah, I mean, Pikachu hits for 300 damage and is really hard to knock out. I mean, when it's working really well, the deck can hang up against anything else. And it has a lot of room for skill expression. Noctowl allowing you to get any two trainer cards. It's impressive. So I think there's still like A to me, like A tier is just going to be like the tier that allows for the most skill expression, allows for like a good player to play this deck and just kind of outskill somebody. And I think you can still do that with Terror Box.
Sure. Yeah, I can get behind that. I think that the deck is definitely difficult to play in the sense that there are many decision points throughout the game, including what you like. The big one is obviously what do you want to get with Noctowl, or which Terra Pokemon do you want to open the game with as you set up your Noctowl, because oftentimes you'll have a board that's, a Fan Rotom, 2 or 3 Hoot Hoots, and then you need to know what Terra Pokemon am I putting down unless I also want to play Area Zero this turn. And
Mm-hmm.
being limited in that capacity, a lot of times it can definitely be a failure mode for some people. Um, I've definitely fallen victim to it by putting the wrong thing down and then realizing it multiple turns later, saying I should have definitely led with this instead.
Yeah, bench management. You think with even 8 bench spaces, like it wouldn't be that hard, but you can get punished pretty hard. Like if you play something down early game, and then it gets discarded from your opponent bumping the stadium, and you lose some of that access to that attacker late game, like a
Yep.
Clefairy or something like that. It can be really hard to close the game out from there. So just it's a really hard deck to play. It's deceptively hard. Like the first 2 knockouts might be really really easy. With like a Wellspring Mask and the Crystal, but then like if you burn through those resources early game, it can get really hard if your opponent's like knocks out your only Hoot Hoot and then Ionos, and you're just kind of grasping at straws and trying to figure out how to get the last few energy to attack. It can be really tough.
Yep. And the next deck, this is one of the ones that I alluded to earlier that I said surprised me because I have
Okay.
obviously been a very vocal Raging Bolt hater on this podcast, but I think Raging Bolt is at worst a B tier deck this week and actually might be bordering on A tier.
Okay.
Um, I've played lists both with and without Noctowl, and I think that they have individual merits for why they're both good. Surprisingly, the one with no Noctowl doesn't really feel like it lost that much consistency from losing cards like Pokestop, and instead you include redundancy in the form of like an extra Squawkabilly or copies of Crispin to be like SADA number 5 and 6 and just be as aggressive as possible in the way that you open the game. Or with the Noctowl version, you have access to things like the Baby Raging Bolt, so you can do an offset prize map for your opponent instead of just being this big beat stick 2/2/2 deck that can't win unless it is going 2/2/2. But being able to leverage this prize trade where you're pinging off Hoot Hoots on your opponent's bench or Dreepies and Dracloaks on your opponent's bench while they're not able to really take advantage of your board in any meaningful way because you've just got like Hoot Hoots, Rotoms, and small Raging Bolts out. It can set up board states that are pretty interesting and actually feels much more skill expressive than an old school Raging Bolt did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair to say. Um, yeah, I think I'm coming around to your point of view. I don't think it allows, like you said, for more skill expression in this format, and I think that's always the key I'm looking for when we're ranking all these decks. I'm curious, are you running the Burning Turbulence Slitherwing to counter Pikachu, or are you just taking that kind of
No,
loss?
yeah. I know a lot of people, for some reason in Japan in particular, they really like Koraidon. Um,
Yeah,
Slitherwing literally does the same amount of damage as Koraidon, so I don't know why you wouldn't run it.
yeah, that's my thought. I saw a lot of people like playing. Like I was building some of these decks just to prep for, some of my local players were like, let's get some games in. And I'm like, sure. So I was building Raging Bolt and I was looking at a lot of lists and they were like not running the Slitherwing. And I'm like, that just seems wrong. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
you don't need a lot of damage for a single prizer and you're hitting for weakness on what you're like. The main reason like you run it is for Pikachu in my mind. Like,
right.
you need an answer for that deck. You need an answer for walls, I guess. I guess Koraidon maybe hits for a little harder into walls. Is that like it hits for 90 and then burns? What does Koraidon hit for? Is it
No,
90 as well?
Slitherwing does 120 and burns.
Oh, okay. So you're two
And
shotting.
Koraidon hits for 130. It actually does less damage,
Sure.
but
So yeah, it
it
beats
doesn't
me.
damage itself. I mean, but it has a different, like, you have to attack with a different ancient guy the turn before. So there are ways for your
Yeah.
opponent to potentially stop you from doing that. Like, in my mind, Slitherwing is just better. But
Yeah.
I guess maybe the argument is if you Slitherwing their Pikachu, they can counter catch your Slitherwing to the bench and then like Wellspring, KO, Hoot Hoot, and Slitherwing in the same turn. But that still feels like a stretch to me.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that's
I just
you're
don't
not
see
going to
the
see.
argument.
Yeah, I think if you're knocking out Pikachu and they do that, and they're not focusing on knocking out your bigger guys, you can still go 2-2-2. Like you're
Right.
still doing like that effective price trade. Like if you get the first knockout with Slitherwing because they put Pikachu in the active, thinking you don't have an answer for it. Like I think that just seals the game in a lot of ways.
Sure.
But I don't know. I mean, you've played it a little bit more, and I think we're kind of on the same page with it. But yeah, I like that the idea that now Raging Bolt can play as a one prize attacking deck, which is kind of cool. Um, but yeah, let's keep moving on. I don't really want to make this a Raging Bolt. Uh, I don't know,
No.
fan fest. We've
We've
ragged on it
changed
long
our
enough.
tune. We've changed our tune.
Wow,
We are the
we've come
Raging
so
Bolt
far.
believers right now.
Dang,
I'm still
crazy.
probably not playing it this weekend, but
Sure,
it is not a D tier deck in my mind any longer.
gotcha.
But yeah, we can go ahead and move on. Next deck we've got here on the docket is the Terrapagos Noctowl, and so this would be kind of the Bouffalant based tank
Yeah.
Terrapagos that has kind of risen up.
Yeah, this is interesting to me. So as Terrabox was kind of the big deck in this format coming in, Terrapagos Noctowl was there, and it was kind of a fringe deck, but I think it's moved into like A tier, like prominence now, and I think I put it
Sure.
above Terrabox.
Okay.
But still, you know, yeah, I think it's still below the Dragapult decks in the most part. Maybe above Dragapult Dusknoir, but let's just keep it there for now. It's just so they have them a little bit grouped together. I think there's a lot of things that Terrapagos can do that Terrabox can't. It has just a much better Dragapult matchup for sure. Um, the Bouffalants are huge in a lot of matchups, including Dragapult, but they also just make it really, really difficult for like a Hops deck to do anything against you,
Yeah.
or Ends deck to do anything against you. Like so many decks just struggle to amass damage counters on the board. And yeah, you're able to still kind of do the same things that a Terrabox deck wants to do. You're using Terrapagos a little bit more, but you're still able to do the Wellspring plays. You're still able to do some of those kind of things. And you run the trumpets to help with energy acceleration. You run, uh, you can run a different build of it. I don't know. I don't have any lists pulled up, but I've been really impressed with it. Like I said, it did win our like little for fun tournament on Monday last night, and I think that speaks to like it matches up into the meta really well right now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. The big thing in my mind is being able to just make Terapagos a wall and being a 340 effective HP, or no, 340 because you can slap a bravery charm on that turtle and then put that curly wall in front of it, and suddenly nothing is knocking out your Terapagos outside of the infinite damage decks like Raging Bolt has the capability to do so, and when we'll get to it here in a little bit, Goldengo has the capability to do so as well. But that still is a pretty hefty commitment.
yeah. I
You're
mean,
looking at
Raging Bolt doesn't get the energy like it used to. Like it doesn't explode out of the gate as much as it used to, I'd say.
right.
Um, so it's really difficult to like manage your resources and hit, 350 or whatever it is,
Yeah.
like after all the taxes or whatever you want to call it to hit that number is a lot harder than it was, pre-rotation. So,
I think the other cool thing that this deck does, though, is leveraging that still that Boufflant ability, but making Rotom into an actual kind of
mm,
fearsome attacker. So your little 70 HP Rotom suddenly becomes either a 130 or up to 180 HP one prizer that can kind of do some damage to your opponent's board by gusting up and knocking out their Rotom or their Hoot Hoot or something, and then demanding a response while your only investment is a single energy
yeah,
and a
it's very
stadium.
cool. Yeah, definitely. I think this deck, if I'm getting into Atlanta, I'd just keep smashing games into this one or like play it, think about playing it. Um, yeah, I'm interested. Like, I wanted to, I don't know. I think Trapagos, Noctowl, and Dragapult will probably be the top two, so I might put it up against above Dusknoir at this point.
Okay,
Um, yeah, I think that's where I'm at, just mentally.
sure.
Um, but I think like there are ways you can exploit it. It doesn't run a lot of non-basic attackers, so there's a world where like a Noivern, or I think we have, what is it, the
Farigiraf.
Farigiraf, yeah, would definitely be able to do well against it in some ways. So it's interesting to see. I think it, for the most part, will still be pretty good. Um, but yeah, that's where I'm
Definitely.
at.
Yeah, definitely see it making waves this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, we're going to talk about Charizard Pidgeot. And this is not just Charizard Pidgeot. This is kind of evolved. This is really more of like a Charizard Noctowl deck that also still has a Pidgeot line that you have access to. But really, just in the modern format, Stage 2s, lacking those V Pokemon and Sealstone to give them the consistency boost, have to find it elsewhere. And this was like Charizard Noctowl was something that kind of existed in the previous format, but I still feel like it's just not in a good spot.
Mm.
Um, I think that you struggle with a lot of the decks that are kind of above it here. The big things are the Wellspring Mask from Terravox, just Dragapult in general being kind of a menace, and the fact that you'll be trading 2-hit KOs with Terrapagos Noctowl, and a lot of them are playing either Scoop Up Cyclone and or multiple copies of Penny to be able to just scoop those things up after you hit them, and you're not one hit KOing those things until they get down to one prize and you have a Defiance Band equipped. That's a tough sell.
Yeah, for sure. I'm fine with that. I think Charizard, in my mind, is still like a really really strong attack. But I mean, it's weird to say, but it feels almost like it's been power crept out of the format in a lot of ways. Like,
Sure.
um, it doesn't. You're not running Dusknoir to fix that math a lot. So it can be really tough to just reach those numbers to hit meaningful knockouts throughout the game. So yeah, I agree with that placement in C tier.
Next up would be everyone's favorite cheese coin man, Goldengo.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty hot on Golden Go coming into Atlanta. I'd put it in B tier, probably above Eevee Box. I don't think I'd put it above. Maybe I put it above Raging Bolt. Yeah, I think there's a little bit more flexibility. You get the advantage of not necessarily like you. We did talk about Raging Bolt being able to play the one prize game, but Golden Go definitely plays that game a lot better, a lot easier.
Yeah.
Um, you just set up your first turn, a bunch of gimme goals, and just go from there. So I think Golden Go makes a lot of sense coming into this meta. Like if I mean, we've seen it last format. It had a really good Dragapult matchup, especially when you're running the Monkey Dories with the Dark Energy. And then definitely being able to hit unlimited damage is really nice, and Terrapica's Noctowl. So this is kind of like, I think a lot of the top players will be playing this as a sleeper pick. If maybe not a sleeper pick because it's pretty well known, but like as a counter to the top two decks, I can see this pretty popular. I still think it's B tier. I still think there is some weaknesses. You don't have Pokestop, so it's can be kind of difficult to get your setup going for turn one. Like if you go first, it can get kind of difficult to get your setup before your opponent might be able to Spring Mask on their side or something like that, and then it can really just struggle from there. So there's definitely some. I mean, there's definitely Golden Go believers out there, but it's definitely B tier. I think they're. I don't know. It's still pretty good, but I don't think it's going to be able to like have that consistent finishes to overpower some of the other decks in the format. Like it'll do well when it sets up. It'll do really well, but it won't set up as frequently as the decks above it.
Okay, that's fair. I think in a lot of ways, Goldengo, in my mind, is kind of, this is probably not a fair comparison. I was going to say it's almost like the Lugia of this format,
Hmm.
where when the cards kind of fall the way that the Goldengo player needs to, you're not going to win the game. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah,
But it's probably not quite there. It's close. It's close.
yeah. I think that's a fair thing to say because it definitely feels like it takes advantage of a prize map more effectively than a lot of other decks.
Sure. Sure. And definitely, especially like 260 is kind of an awkward number for decks to hit right now.
Sure.
Next deck would be Gardevoir, and this is one I'm gonna have a hard time placing this confidently. But the big thing, obviously, Gardevoir lost access to that refinement Curlia, and the way that we're seeing people build these decks now is more as kind of a turbo list, as it were, including some people like the Ben Morse list that we featured last week, opting to play cards like Brilliant Blender as their ace spec to just turbo through the deck, have a more consistent way of putting energies in the discard pile, no longer being an Arvin TM Evo deck, instead being a multiple rare candy, multiple night stretcher, professor's research based deck. And I think the deck is less consistent than it was before. And I'm going to struggle to actually put it higher than low B tier. I think the things it has going for it are that it can still kind of make a comeback in the sense that Gardevoir itself is a very good attacker, just because it is so difficult to knock out if you can
Mm-hmm.
get your board established. In a similar vein to Feraligatr, but I think Gardevoir is a little bit more resilient, just because Psychic, and particularly with Lily's Clefairy paired with it, is a very good type right now. And Monkey Dory continues to be probably the most broken card in the game, and Gardevoir is the card that can best take advantage of it. But I still think that it kind of has weaknesses into a lot of the decks above it, and also has the potential to just kind of get steamrolled out of the game pretty easily.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I might put it higher in B tier if I was on like it's hard to place it. I think you're right, but I think it'll have its like champions this weekend for sure, and
Sure.
I think we'll see it do pretty well. I think there'll probably be like one or two in top cut, easily. And we've seen it time and time again that people sleep on Gardevoir or say
Yeah.
I can't play that deck, and then it just does really well. Like Piper Payne will play it, or it's Henry Chow, or basically
Oh well, if it's Henry Chow Gardevoir, then
yeah.
we're gonna need another tier up
We
here.
need a Henry Chow tier. Yeah, for sure. I mean, but that's the thing. I think there's some so we've seen some builds with no like that just want to abuse Monkey Door as much as possible with like two Badoo, no bravery charms, just basically trying to be as disruptive with Monkey Door as possible. I think I kind of like Gardevoir going into this tournament. Not that I would play it because I just have a hard time playing Gardevoir. But yeah, I think B tier, and then I might move it up higher. But that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we
So
could put it here. I think
yeah, I think that's
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 not
probably a fair
that's
place.
not too surprising.
Yeah,
Uh, Next deck is a deck I know you're a pretty big fan of. So why don't you sell me on Hop Zacian and where you think it should be on this list?
sure. this is the deck I probably spent the most time playing in this format. I want this deck to work so bad. I think there's a lot of potential there. You know, I've talked about it on the podcast a couple times where it's like feels like Buzzwole when you're able to prize map with, you know, the 2-1-1-1-2 kind of line, to just prevent your opponent from taking like the game over. You're able to just deny prizes like that. Um, but at the end of the day, like it struggles, like especially if we see Terrapica's Noctowl do really well, and like that becomes a larger percent. Like if that deck's anywhere near close to like top 3 decks in the tournament, or like a 8 to 9 meta percent share, Obsession really struggles into that deck. So I could see I think it's like top of C tier for me right now. Um, I don't know. Maybe it's even worse than Enzorark, but I still think it has a lot of potential. It has some cool tricks it can pull off, but I don't know how good it is at the end of the day. Like, I don't think it does anything better than a lot of the decks above it. Even like Wellspring Ogre Pawn just feels better into a lot
Yeah.
of things than Zacian does, and like Cramorant's cool, but it doesn't really one shot anything effectively. Um, and Monkey Dories is cool, but this deck I think struggles to use Monkey Dory a lot of the time. If your opponent's taking one shots against you, we've seen people having to put Calamitous Snowy Mountain in their decks just to get damage on their side of the field, just so they can use Monkey Dory. And that to me, that that doesn't look like a winning deck to me.
No.
It has a decent Dragapult matchup, you know, being able to, but even then, like a good Dragapult player should be able to play around a lot of the strategies of this. Like they can just kind of play around Cramorant effectively, forcing you to just use Zacian and Snorlax, and that really kind of ties your hands behind your back for sure. Um, but I still like the deck. I still think it's fun. I think it's a good deck. It just it might not. I don't know. The power level might just be a little too low for it to be in the top A and B tier for sure.
I can agree with that. I think this is a deck that you will come back to next rotation, honestly. Uh,
Really? Yeah.
and I think that at present it's just a step behind. I'm personally a fan of the Iron Valiant version of this deck, much more so than the Monkey Dory one, just because in my mind, like you said, it's hard to get the damage on your board for the Monkey Dory to even be useful to begin with. And the way that you typically do that is by utilizing the Calamitous Snowy Mountain, which means you don't have Post Wick in play, which means you're doing less damage raw. You just have more control over where that damage goes. So, and I just love Iron Valiant. I mean, doing jet energy
Yeah.
shenanigans with Iron Valiant is a lot of fun. The argument against it is obviously having extra two prizers on your board is not a great thing overall. But the deck can steal games from people. It can steal games from any deck up here, literally
Yeah.
any one of them. You know, you turn one, especially the Iron Valiant one. Turn one, donk whatever, insert Pokemon. Your opponent opens Badoo, you open Iron Valiant, Jet Energy, or you open like Techno Radar, Jet Energy, Future Capsule. Cool, I win the game. If you if you
Yeah.
open with the ability just to do an insta strike with Zacian on turn one and knock out a Dreepy on the bench or a Hoot Hoot on the bench, a lot of times that can just offset your opponent by enough tempo to steal a game from some of these, you know, quote unquote better decks. But this still, at the end of the day, feels like a 5-2-2 kind of deck.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels kind of hard to tie with it, so maybe 2-2 is probably not the right thing, but like a, I don't know,
6-3
five,
for
yeah,
sure.
6-3 at best. Like
Yeah.
it's not quite gonna squeak into day two in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it where it's really back and forth. Like when I was playing with like when it operates really well, you're able to pick apart boards really well. Like the Devo in the deck feels really cool in some matchups.
For sure.
And you're able to outskill like somebody that doesn't really know how to play against you. But like once you get further into the tournament and somebody's like able to like see what you're trying to do, see that you're trying to prize map, you know, the strategy falls apart when your opponent's like, okay, Turo, and like now
Yeah.
your thing that you've been building up for the last 3 turns is just gone, and now you're
Yeah.
just like, well, I guess I can't take those 2 prize cards. So what do I do now? So yeah, just any deck that gets nerfed by Terra. Terra's pretty much played in all of the top decks in A tier, and yeah, like all of them essentially, if not, Terra or Penny, or Scoop Up Cyclone even in some of them. And
Right.
that doesn't bode well for Hopstation.
No. No, unfortunately. But be on the lookout a year from now when we'll talk to you about the next rotation, where Hopzation is a menace in the format.
For sure.
But if Team Rocket cards have not taken over the game by then,
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Shaman gets printed out next set,
that's
and I
fair.
think that just kind of squashes a lot of setup decks, or squashes Hopstation from being effective against setup decks. But well, people, just because a card exists doesn't mean everybody's running it. Like
Yeah,
Manaphy went in and out of decks throughout the format, so it's TBD on Hopsation.
sure.
But you were talking about a deck that cheesed wins in Hopsation. I think this one does even more of that.
Yeah, definitely. The next one up here is the Poison Archaladon deck, and this deck is terrible. I don't think anybody should play it. This, in my mind, is literally the worst version of Archaladon you can play, and you're essentially banking on the fact that your opponent is going to have a poor enough setup for you to steamroll them and not let them play the game. And if you're trying to do that with this, if you want to do that with the poison package, you should play Roaring Moon instead of Archaladon. But
Hmm.
in that, I still would probably put in this tier. I think Archaladon is a strong card, and the thing that makes it a strong card is its large HP pool. And to take full advantage of the way that this deck functions, you have to nerf that HP pool by a significant amount.
Yeah, I remember. I remember playing ladder with Hopsation at the beginning of the format, and I would like get paired up against Archaladon. I'm like, oh, this is an auto loss, and then they would bench like a Brute Bonnet. I'm like, oh no, I auto win. Like that's how I felt. Like that's the degree to which the poison package just destroys your ability to win games. Like I agree 100% with your assessment of saying Archaladon's strength is being able to just Turo after you've been hit for 230 damage or whatever,
Yeah.
and just say, okay, here's another one. Can you deal with this one? You know, very similar to like an Arceus Inteleon back in the day with Charon's Care, just being able to cycle those attackers again and again and again. It's really good, but yeah, Poison Archaladon not really good.
Yeah, I forgot to place this in the tier list.
Yeah, definitely bottom of C. I think it is playable,
Yeah, yeah,
but
and you'll definitely cheese wins
yeah,
here. Like you'll donk Hoot Hoots, you'll donk Rotoms, you'll donk Badoos. This deck probably actually has a pretty good Terra box matchup, just because the poison package does give you access to one hit KO Pikachu. You can leverage the entire game without putting the perilous jungle into play, so you do still have a thick HP pool to work with. And you can honestly, in a lot of circumstances, go out of your way to not poison your Archaladon while still doing that 220. So that matchup is good. I just feel like it makes it much more difficult to beat Dragapult in
yeah,
particular.
yeah. I agree. So
But
we've talked
with
about the worst version of Archaladon. How about just regular Archaladon? Well, I think I feel a lot more favorable about this. Yeah, I mean, do I think it's B tier worthy? Yeah, S tier definitely not. I don't think it's A tier. I want to put it in B tier. I want to, especially going into this meta. If we look at the top 2 decks, I think Terrapago's Noctowl can threaten it, but Dragapult's going to really struggle to deal with it. I mean, Dragapult Dusknoir is a little bit more favorable, maybe, but I don't know. Like looking at the meta percentage, I think it was like surprising because, um, yeah, Dragapult Dusknoir, the Dragapult deck. Sorry, I'm getting lost in the weeds real quick.
no, you're good. Take your
But
time.
matchup wise, I want to see this versus Archaladon. Yeah, it's about 50%. So I think Archaladon, like into Dragapult, that should be a favorable matchup, but it ends up being closer to 50%. that makes me want to put it in C tier. Like if you're not able to beat the deck that you really like are built for to beat, I don't see how that bodes well. So let me see. Terrapagos Noctowl versus Archaludon beats it 55% of the time. Oh, sorry, 54% of the time. So yeah, I don't think like if those are the two top decks, I think if you've got a 50% or a losing percentage, I'd put it in C tier at that point. So maybe the top of C tier or closer to the top. Um,
I'm going to give you some pushback on this one.
okay.
I actually think Archaludon is at worst a B tier deck and actually might be an A tier deck, and it entirely depends on which version
Wow.
of the deck you're running. There are a lot of partners for this Pokemon right now. I mean, we've obviously seen the poison one broken out here. I've seen straight lists. There are lists that are partnered with all of the Hops Pokemon. There are lists that are partnered just with Hops Dubwool to have access to extra
Mm.
gusting cards while still being able to utilize Turo for the turn and being kind of the big I'm gonna 2-2-2, but be harder for you to take 2-2-2 into me because I'm so massive. Notably, doesn't offer up easy prizes for Wellspring Mask Ogerpon to take advantage of. Um, I think that the limitless game percentages that you're seeing are
Sure.
skewed by a decent amount, just because I feel like higher skilled players in limitless tournaments are more likely to gravitate towards Terrapagos and Dragapult than they are to Archaludon.
Yeah, I mean, Archaludon was like the free deck for this latter period, I think, if
Okay.
we look at that. So that might be part of that too.
I mean,
You
I
know,
could
if
I could still see it being below these kind of infinite damage decks, which I think are probably what I would say the ceiling of B tier
mm,
is. But I do think that it is a better play than both Gardevoir and EV Box that I think
okay,
will struggle into some of the higher tier decks.
I think that's fair to say. Do you run it with Hopsization in your deck? Like, do you run? I think is that your?
No, my favorite build right now is the one that utilizes Enzorark as a draw engine.
Oh, okay. I think I saw Zool playing with that, so that's cool. So you just
Yeah,
take that
it's
loss, I guess.
take what loss?
The Cornerstone Ogre Pawn.
Oh, I mean it still plays a Hops option. Like
Oh, okay, okay.
so you have an out to one hit KO the cornerstone. You don't care about that guy.
Yeah. No, okay. Just making sure like that seems like a pretty exploitable weakness, but yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
No, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I haven't really played any games with the Hobbs or sorry, the Enzorark variant. So, I saw Azul play it like briefly on stream, but I didn't really sit down and watch it. But yeah, okay. So that's yeah, I mean that's pretty cool. I guess I'll leave it to your opinion a little bit more because I definitely don't have a lot of games with it.
Yeah, and the nice thing I think is that I think the double one is actually pretty viable as well, and that one is a little bit obviously less consistent because you don't have an onboard draw Pokemon, but you have the ability to say, I don't care about your cornerstone, I'm going to go around it forever until I can't anymore,
Mm-hmm.
or you have the ability to just take easy free KOs on your opponent's bench Pokemon like their Pheasantipity or their Latias or what have you that they're probably going to have on board and getting away from the thing that you don't want to hit into, like the big Bravery Charm Terrapagos.
Yeah.
You just go knock out something else instead and you kind of go on your way. But that's enough about the bridge. The last thing we wanted to talk about are the wall deck. The dedicated walls deck, I should say, because I do believe walls are typically present in most for alligator lists now. But the just melodic cornerstone for Farigiraf, Mimikyu, I'm going to play all the walls and hope that one of them is enough to get me over the line against your deck. And I just feel like this deck only pops up when metagames are centralized.
Mm-hmm.
Only really succeeds when people aren't prepared for it. Similar to what we saw in Baltimore this season
Mm.
with the
Yep.
like cornerstone Noivern deck. Nobody was ready for it, so it did very well. I assume a decent amount of people are preparing for this, and people are diversifying their deck enough that they can kind of get around it. And that may not be the case for everything, but like if we look at this straight Dragapult as an example, you can't hit melodic with Dragapult, obviously, but if you play the Blood Moon Ursaluna in your deck, you as the walls player, you have to take prizes to win this matchup. This is not a deck where I'm trying to win an attrition war. And if your opponent
Right.
is able to kind of do anything, just putting little bits of damage on you and then sweeping your melodic with a big bear that they can't one hit KO. So you have to put something else on your bench that is then vulnerable to the Dragapult. And there's enough maneuverability there that the deck does not just solidly beat these other cards.
Yeah.
And same goes for some of this other stuff like Terrapagos Noctowl. Yes, it's all basics, but a lot of the Terrapagos decks are leveraging Dark Energies and Monkey Dory. So even if you put that Photograph in front of them, one, you're not doing that much damage thanks to the Bouffalants, and two, any damage you do put is able to be reflected back to you. And if you put anything else down to try to get around that, Terrapagos can one hit KO Cornerstone. You have a lot of times they play their own Cornerstone even to just hit into your walls. And the wall deck itself is super vulnerable to Cornerstone.
Yeah, it
Only
is.
having your own Cornerstone to work with. And if they have a Cornerstone and Monkey Dory, and you might also have Monkey Dory, but they can probably leverage it a little bit more easily. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a more consistent deck against your wall deck. I just don't see it being successful overall this weekend.
I'd agree with that. I think the big factor Walls had going for it is a surprise factor, and then the second factor it would be the predictability of a metagame that it could exploit, and I don't see either of those factors for it this weekend. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. I think control would be probably something we didn't really put here, but I think
Sure.
that would be a little bit higher than the Walls deck, maybe in B tier even. But that's another deck like it works best in a metagame that's well established. Um, it's kind of in flux right now in the lead up to Atlanta, so it'll be interesting to see, how much of this comes to fruition. But yeah, I don't know. Is there any other decks that you're thinking of that we might have left off?
I don't think so. I mean, I know Goldengo Dragapult was popular in Japan in this format.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't see the appeal of it. I think you're taking two very good cards and making them worse by putting them together.
Yeah.
Um,
Future
Future Hands
hands.
kind of popped up a little bit. This
It's
to me,
okay.
this goes in what I would consider Raging Bolt tier or previous Raging Bolt tier, where
Yeah.
you're just kind of praying that your opponent is falls victim to what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Frostless Monkey Dory, I actually think is pretty interesting and might be a B or C tier deck overall.
I was surprised. It did really well in some of the late night tournaments or whatever you call them. Or I think it's pretty good. Uh, yeah.
Another one that I would call out as kind of a weird pick that I could see making a splash is a Blissey based wall deck,
Mm-hmm.
just because Blissey itself is a pseudo wall and is able to help with that kind of energy maneuverability that the wall deck struggles with overall, and has options to play other tech cards to make those cards more impactful.
Yeah, Blissey is really really good into Dragapult, like
Yep.
super good. And then yeah, if there's not a lot of stuff that hits for fighting weakness. Like I think Cornerstone doesn't hit for weakness, right?
No. Nope.
So yeah, not a lot can one shot a Blissey. So if you're able to just kind of cycle them similar to like Archaludon, and you can get pretty effective with it. If you get like 3 Blissies in play, you can definitely like cycle your energy around and heal pretty effectively. And utilize Monkey Dories to move some of the damage and kind of go through stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't think it's like super good.
No,
But
no,
yeah,
it's probably
definitely.
not going to win the event by any means, but it's something that I think would be a more effective version of walls going into this event
Mm,
specifically until
okay.
things settle down a little bit and you can kind of refine the wall deck to target specific decks that you're looking for rather than trying to cast this broad net that hits everything at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that about sums it up. Is there anything that you would want to move around on here before we just say like
Mm,
ship it and say this is the list?
uh, no, I'm pretty happy with this. Yeah. I don't think there's anything I'd change.
Okay, cool. I think uh
People are gonna like think it's funny that we put United Wings on there.
maybe we'll post it and see what they think.
Yeah.
If you did see
You
this
should put
online, let
United
us
Wings in
know
S tier for sure.
For sure.
Just
Oh yeah.
throw people off.
There we go.
All right, go
It's their problem now. Um,
ahead.
uh, so that's going to close things out for the tier list for this week. The last thing that I wanted to kind of bring up as we start to kind of wind things down is that we are going to start uploading the show to YouTube in addition to our Spotify uploads. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be announcing that on socials when they start going up, and we're going to have not every episode, unfortunately. I'd have to go back and re-edit some of them because I don't have the video files for them anymore. But I know I've got video files that go all the way back to, I believe, episode 13 or 14. And so we'll have a good catalog of those available for people if video viewing pleasure is more suited to YouTube than Spotify in your specific instance. But otherwise, John, was there anything else you wanted to say before we close things out for the week?
Nope. If you're in Atlanta, I'll try to say hi if you're interested in saying so. I'll be busy doing deck check this weekend, so I don't know how much floor time I'll be on there. Like it'll be probably a little less than what I'm usually used to. But I'll definitely try to make a point to, if I can, say hi to as many people as possible. I'm there to work more than to socialize, but it's still fun to see people, like, especially in Atlanta. Like I grew up in Charleston, so it's really cool to like see a lot of
Sure.
players that definitely don't travel as far as some of the other regionals we've had this year, but it's like we'll travel to Atlanta, so it'll be cool. Like one of my friends from when I started playing, I'm rooming with like the professor who ran the league that I played in when I started playing,
Oh,
essentially.
wow.
Like Dave Griggs, I don't know if you know him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm rooming with Dave Griggs.
Okay.
So that'll be fun.
Cool.
Yeah. So it'll be good to catch up with him. And then yeah, just like my friend Will Beers is coming, and then my friend Josh Harvley. So just a bunch of like people that are from Charleston or from South Carolina that I know pretty well in the community. It'll be good to see. If anybody listening is coming and wants to say hi, I'll definitely say hi back. I got to give Hunter his reverse plasma energy for the
Oh, yeah.
trivia. I'm bringing that. And then, yeah, just excited to kind of see everybody and cheer you on, respectfully as much as I can. I'm definitely not biased at all, but
Well, I appreciate that. I know.
yeah,
Yeah, for anybody listening, John and I are definitely approachable. Um, may not look it. I've been told that I can look intimidating at first glance, but just come up and say hi. Like if I'm not busy doing like actively in the middle of something and I have time for a conversation, I am more than happy to oblige you with that. And I'm hoping to actually bring some old format decks with me.
nice.
So if you're looking for some play with that, I don't know specifically what I'm going to bring, but if anybody's looking for some games in some older formats, come find me or hit me up and we can see if we can schedule some games if we have some time. I know I'm not staying in the city itself. We're staying with a friend, actually, probably like half an hour or so outside of the city. So that may make things a little bit more difficult, but hopefully won't be too bad at the end of the day. But yeah, I think that that's about going to do it for this week. And hopefully, we will be back next week to bring you all up to speed on the results of Atlanta and the goings on there.
Yep.
So, with that being said, thank you for listening, and we will catch you guys on the next episode of the Battle Frontier.
Have a good week.